Welcome back to Baithak. My name is Ariyaan Moktan, and this is my podcast. In episode 3 onwards, I was thinking that we can segment these podcasts into three parts. Firstly, I would like to begin with khabar. Khabar will be a section where I'll be going through some particular current affairs and news stories, which I would like to cover and discuss further. Then we'll have the main section of Baithak, and then a small discussion at the end about a few comments that were left up in my previous videos. So let's dive right into it. In cover today, I just wanted to discuss the recent Lok Sabha elections that took place in India. BJP won historically for the third time in a row. And in particularly in Darjeeling, Mr. Raju Bishta won the Member of Parliament seat. Now, it was quite a uncontested win. He won by quite a large margin, and I just wanted to discuss what it means for the Darjeeling people. Now, Mr. Raju Bishta is an Indian Gorkha himself. He was born in Manipur, and he has a quite a prolific history. He's been the managing director of one of very reputable companies. He's been an RSS Kartakarya for a major portion of his life from his childhood itself. And he is quite a, I personally feel he is quite a nice figure. And he, I feel, is a good leader to lead us through this turmoil time. Now, one thing I really like about him is that he's been really looking at Darjeeling politics from a grassroots level, what he calls his grassroots democracy. During the recent Panchayat elections, this was quite evident. His focus has mostly been on small issues and trying to fix small issues which were plaguing our society. And I feel this was a very refreshing way to look at things instead of trying to, tackle a huge non-existent or non-tangible issue. You looked at small tangible issues which could be easily fixed and progressed slowly towards them. Now, many of the things that he worked towards was increasing the funding towards the tea gardens, the expansion of the recent Bagdogra airports. He's slowly developing a solid waste management system in the hills. He has the Jal Jeevan scheme which he's working towards to provide clean water in the hills as well as the plains of Darjeeling. And he's also working on a lot of other issues as well, like landslide mapping with ISRO, so that we can find a better coagulated data set where we can find exactly which areas are more prone to landslides and which will face landslides if certain. So basically, these things are minute issues compared to what politicians have been talking about. And I feel it's very important that he's been focusing on these and slowly delivering results. Two of my famous stories, or two of my favorite stories, are that in Srikhola, there wasn't an ambulance, and they've been facing a lot of issues due to that. And Mr. Raj Mishra famously worked through the system. He didn't donate one out of his own money. He worked through the system to deliver a ambulance to that society. And secondly, Jalpaiguri or somewhere around that region, a lot of people were facing issues with boarding the train as the train was not stopping in those stations. And he worked again tirelessly through the system and managed to get those trains to stop at that station so that the Indian Gorkha communities could utilize that station. Now, one more thing that I find very refreshing that he talks about is that Indian Gorkhas are not only in Darjeeling. He himself being from Manipur, he realizes that the Indian Gorkha population is quite widespread in India. There's a large population which exists in the northeast. There's a large population which exists in Sikkim as well. Darjeeling obviously is the hotspot for Indian Gorkhas, but there's a large communities of people living outside of Darjeeling as well, especially in the northeast. And he wants to have a much more homogeneous and holistic approach towards the development. And I find that to be quite refreshing. So, of course, politicians have a tendency to overpromise, and it's quite stupid in this day and age to keep faith in a politician. But I'm very excited to see what he has in store for the Hills. Now let's move on towards the discussion we were having last week. As I was discussing last week, the Indian Gorkha community faced this perfect set of conditions which caused the Western influences to be quite strong. We had kind of lost touch with our roots and we had kind of lost touch with our traditions and culture. So we were kind of looking for a new culture to latch on to or to create. Now, this would have been the perfect set of circumstances where we could have created the new identity, but with the advent of social media and the influence of the Western ideology, we found that we were actually adopting their culture. Now, on the previous episode, I mentioned three very important factors which I feel personally have been really influencing the Gorkha identity, and those were commercialism, liberalism, and hip hop. Now, on the last episode, we discussed the influences of commercialism, and today let's give a dive into liberalism. Now, me personally, as a traditionalist, don't have a lot of liking towards the liberal philosophy, but I must admit that it does have a lot of pros. It has worked towards the betterment of the society, and there are a lot of things that you can't argue with. But today, I would like to particularly focus on a few factors which I feel have been conversely and to a certain extent negatively impacting the Gorkha identity and the Gorkha culture. Now, firstly, I would like to talk about feminism. Now, I understand that all of these are quite dicey topics and fragile topics to talk about, so please take my opinions with a grain of salt. And just remember that if you do not agree with any of these, you are always free to voice out your opinions. And I'm not here dictating my ideas, I'm just trying to bring these conversations out into the front. With that being said, I would like to state that I feel feminism has reached a sort of a saturation point. It started with women trying to get an equal stance, trying to get an equal place in society, and I feel to a large extent that has been accomplished. Essentially started with women trying to enter the workforce and trying to vote. Now, largely to an extent, both of these have been very successful. And beyond this, feminism has kind of lost its touch and kind of lost the banner under which they were fighting. To the extent that it's now become a kind of a enforcement rather than an empowerment movement. I feel really sad when the feminism movement has actually restricted the choices of women in today's society. Now, of course, with the feminism movement, we saw a lot more women entering the workforce. We saw a lot more women trying to be businessmen, trying to enter government posts. And of course, that is a wonderful thing and that is a very nice thing. But this has created an unfair pressure on women to work to the extent that where if you're a woman in today's day and age and you're not actively pursuing a career or you're not actively pursuing a job which pays well and creates a sense of respect and identity in the society, you're not looked at as a successful woman. And I feel like women no longer have the choice to just stay at home and be a wife and be a mother. And I feel that's a bad thing. And I feel that's a sad thing because to begin with, the movement was started to create more choices for women and to create the situation where if she wants to work and if she wants to go to a job and earn that money and bring that sustenance to her family, she has that option. But if she wants to stay at home and be a wife and be a mother to her children and be that essential cog in that family, she has that option as well. But today, I feel like there is a lot of pressure on young women, especially, to work and to kind of be successful and to create a career where I don't think a lot of women today have that opportunity to stay at home and be stay-at-home wives, which I feel is the best job in the world and should always be promoted. Now, what has what this has created is this has created adversely created two-parent working households. And a very sad consequence of this has become that although monetarily and economically the family is doing very well with two incomes coming into the house, the child loses out on a lot of the attention which is provided primarily through the mother, who was the homemaker and who was creating that perfect environment for that child to be reared in. Now, of course, the father also has a big hand to play in this, a big responsibility in the rearing of the child. But with both of them working and both of them being so busy with their work, when so even when the father fails to stand up, the mother also fails to stand up, then the child is left out. And of course, the parents also feel a lot of guilt for not giving their children enough time and effort. And how do they try to overcome that guilt? They try to provide monetary gifts. They try to buy them bikes. They try to, buy them the latest phones and the latest technology, and basically just shower them with money so that they themselves as parents feel better about the situation, and the child himself also does not feel left out and also does not feel like his parents don't pay attention to him. Now, this is not very pervasive. It's not very there in the world, and I'm not pointing fingers at any family, but I just wanted to say that this has been slowly coming into the society, and this has caused a lot of spoiled children to come up, and this has led to the perfect set of circumstances for the drug crisis to be so high. Now, of course, this would be a rather tangential topic, which we will dive into later, but I just wanted to point out that this was also a sad consequence of initially feminism. Now, other than that, there have been a lot of other new age liberalist ideas which have been pervasing themselves into the Gorkha identity and Gorkha culture as well. Some examples of this could be equity movements, inclusionary movements, awareness movements, environmentalist movements, and veganism. And I'm sure all my listeners would be well aware about how invasive these ideas today seem. Like, everyone's talking about it, and a lot of people are kind of diving headfirst into some of these movements. And of course, it's not a bad thing, and it has created a lot of positive consequences as well. But I feel ultimately liberalist ideas have a tendency, because that is the foundation, right? What is a liberal ideology? It means that you do away with the old and create something new to stand upon. And during this process, the youth especially, diving themselves into these ideologies, have completely forgotten where they come from and have completely forgotten the culture that they stand for. And this has led to a related markdown in the amount of youth who are actively interested in their culture, who are actively proud of their culture, and of course are also actively religious, which is also quite a sad thing to see. Now, of course, the religion part of it, I will be delving deeper into that. But overall, the reason why I bring out these arguments is because I have this theory. I call it the lagging mirror theory. Darjeeling and the Indian Gorkha community basically stands as a mirror to the US society and the Western society. But we are a mirror that is a little bit lagging behind. We are always a few steps behind because we are trying to, we see them and we imbibe those ideas and then implement them. So we are always a few steps behind. And this has been quite true in the past 5 to 10 years, that if you just look at the US society today, you're kind of peering into the future of what the Indian Gorkha society will look after a few years. And when I look at the US society today and where liberalism has led them, it kind of scares me to see that the Indian Gorkha community is moving towards these same lines. And the main thing I see in the US society is that liberals and traditionalists or conservatives have stopped talking and have stopped engaging in debate and discussion. And that is the reason why I feel that debate and discussion is the cornerstone of any society, of any community. And I feel like as long as we're discussing these things and as long as we're talking, things will be fine. And for hip hop, we'll move that into the next episode. Let's look at some of the comments that were left out on the previous video. The first comment we have is from Mr. Mahesh Moktan, who is of course my father. He points out, wow, Ari, nicely researched and very well presented. Check out on Segoli Treaty between then British India and Nepal, where one clause basically allowed free movement and right to do business in each other's territories. No visas are required to date. Subhash Singh wanted cancellation of this clause and formation of separate Gorkha regiments for Indian Gorkhas to protect and ensure our separate identity. Further, Indian Gorkhas are now politically divided. We need to unite as a single political unit. Hope my observation helps. Now, of course, this is a very interesting thing that I'm very glad he pointed out, that there is a treaty. It started as the Segoli Treaty, which I believe now has become the Friendship Treaty between India and Nepal when India gained its independence. It basically states that any citizen from India can go to Nepal and do business, own property, and live as a citizen. And any citizen of Nepal can come to India and do business and own property and live as a citizen. Now, this creates a further confusion about what exactly it means to be an Indian Gorkha. And I had gone into this topic in my article that I wrote, which, if you want, is always available in my blog. So I basically pointed out that the main difference between an Indian Gorkha who is born and brought up and is a member of the Indian Gorkha society and a Nepali citizen who just comes into India and then does business here is that we have the right to vote and we actually can engage into the electoral systems. But those people who come from Nepal and live in India, they don't have the right to vote. So I believe that's the important distinction. But of course, further steps could be created and further steps could be done to create a distinction between these two communities. Now, I believe that cancellation of this clause, as Subhash Singh wanted to do, would be taking a too much of a step, but I believe other things could be done in regards to this. And the formation of separate Gorkha regiments would be a little too much on the nose, but of course, that is worth discussing as well, because basically it would create an alienation of the Gorkha identity, and which is something we don't want again, because like we want the Indian Gorkha community and the Indian Gorkha identity to be a part of the Indian identity and to amalgamate with the Indian society. And I feel the current Gorkha regiments which exist as a part of the Indian army are good enough for that purpose. And we don't want a separate Gorkha regiment which is just for a separate Indian Gorkha identity. But of course, very interesting facts. And of course, it's very important that we remain united as a single political unit, because as long as we are divided, we will be fighting each other and other people will take advantage of that. Moving on to the next comment. We have Zigmi Gurung, who's a very good friend of mine. He says, bro now got me studying language. Great analysis, by the way. Wish every Gorkha read this. Now, it's very interesting, right? Because like I also felt this when I was studying the linguistic history of the Indian Gorkhas, that language is so subtle. It's always there, but it plays such a big role in everyday identity politics and everyday identity formation and the formation of a culture itself. So it's very interesting how language plays such a vital role, but at the same time it's so subtle. And so that's the reason why I wanted to bring out, and it's very good to know that other people found that interesting as well. We also have Shradeep Lama, who says, It's commendable that you're addressing the Indian Gorkha community's identity crisis. Acknowledging and discussing such challenges is the first step towards finding solutions and fostering greater inclusivity and understanding. Every modern generation Gorkha should hear this, eagerly waiting for your next episode. Keep going. I thank you very much for your kind words. And yes, I feel like you've really understood what I was trying to say. That it's the youth that needs to hear this, and it's the modern generation of Indian Gorkhas that need to hear this, because this is where we are separating out, and this is the perfect situation, and we are the perfect generation who can create this Indian Gorkha identity. And I'm very glad that I'm being able to get through to you guys. So, very good. Next, we have the Vikasha, who is actually my sister. She says, very interesting discussion. I remember a while back when I was traveling in Nepal, I was unable to understand the Nepali. While in conversation with my mother in Darjeeling, Nepali, basically Indian Gorkha Nepali, a guy came up and asked which language we were speaking, because he could understand the words we were speaking, but not the sentences. In addition, I would also like to point the Treaty of Peace and Friendship that was signed by India and Nepal on 1950. The treaty greatly undermines our identity as an Indian. Looking forward to coming episodes. Oh, and wanted to ask, will there be short form content updated on Insta or YouTube Shorts? Will you also be having guests, or is it just going to be you? Do you have an upload routine set in for the podcast? Would love to hear back. Now, yes, I thank you for your kind words, and I would want to state that yes, this is something that I feel a lot of people have faced, and this is something that we have also noticed when people from Nepal come here. It sounds like a different language, but I think you kind of miss my point that it does not matter if it is linguistically different. It's just that the community, if it wants to separate out, we can create a different dialect. But of course, it's very interesting to note that it has become linguistically different as well, to the point that where they think it's a different language, and we sometimes also feel it's like a different language. But very interesting point that you pointed out. The Treaty of Peace and Friendship, of course, we've already discussed that, and that's also a very good point. Coming to your questions, there are short form content which will be coming out. I'm still working on creating a lot more short form contents. For now, it's just going to be me. I'm still looking into whether I should bring guests into this or not, but for the moment, it's just going to be me. And I do have an upload routine set. If you've been noticing, I'll be uploading hopefully every Monday. So I believe that'll be all. That's it for the episode today. See you in the next one. Godspeed.